Learning checkpoint 7.2 is a little bit different than the other learning checkpoints that you've had this semester. On this one, you're going to see that there are actually three different versions of the questions. You will receive one of the three versions. There's no way of knowing in advance which one you're going to get. And the reason that it's different is just because the OHS created this checkpoint instead of the teacher creating the checkpoint from scratch. That's why it ends up looking a little bit different than what you're used to. But it is still just a little 5-question assignment to help you master the material from lesson 7.2. So I'm going to go over one version of each question in detail, and then the other two versions of the questions will be worked out in a similar manner. So you'll just follow the steps of the example that I'm going to go over in detail, no matter which version of the question you have. So if your question doesn't look exactly like the one I'm going over, it's okay. You're not in the wrong spot. This quiz just has separate versions of the questions. So number 1 says the histogram shows the ages of cars sold at a car auction. What percent of the cars was less than 20 years old or more than 40 years old? So let's go pick through that key information and see which groups I'm looking for. I want the cars that are less than 20 years old. So if I come over to the histogram and I find that, I see that these class breakdowns right here, that this is for cars 0 to 9 years old. This is for cars 10 to 19 years old. So I know that I'm going to want both of these sections, and I'm going to total these up. So I have 3 cars here, 2 cars here. That means I have 5 cars in this pink category that was given to me in the problem. The other category that it asked me to look for was cars that are more than 40 years old. So again, I'm going to come over to my histogram and look for whichever class or interval of on this x-axis down here that relates to. And the only ones that are greater than 40 are these right here. And if I read the histogram, I see that that is 3 cars. That's really hard to see. So the green category right here is 3 cars. So I know that I have a total of 8 cars that are within the categories that the problem was asking me for. But the question doesn't say how many cars, it said what percent of the cars. And the way that we find a percent is like this. We take the part that we care about, divide by the total number of objects, and then multiply that by 100. And we can use a calculator to accomplish this. Well, I know which part I care about. I know it's these 5 cars and these 3 cars for a total of 8. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down, that my numerator is going to be 5 plus 3. Now I just need to go figure out the total number of cars that are in this problem to put that in my denominator. So I'm going to come through. I know that there are 3 cars in this first interval, 2, this one says 8, the next one says 4, there are 0 right here, and then 3. If I total all of those up, let's see, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 8 is 13, 13 plus 4 is 17, and then 17 plus 3 gives me 20. So my total number of cars is 20. This is 8 over 20. And then I can use my calculator to figure this out. 8 divided by 20. Let me pull the calculator up and drag it over for you. 8 divided by 20 gives me 0.4. And then percentages need to be multiplied by 100. So if I do 0.4 times 100, I will get 40%. The other two versions of the questions look like this for number 1, and your categories are just different. That's the only difference. So if you have this question right here about the ages of volunteers who cleaned up a beach, this one's asking you for people who are at least 15, but no more than 24. So you're going to be looking for the people who are at least 15, no more than 24. So it's going to be this group of people right here. You'll need to find those values. And then version 3 of this question, what percent of the volunteers worked 8 to 11 hours? That would be this group. or 16 to 19 hours. That would be this group as well. So you have two separate groups in here to figure up, same thing as in version number 2. Question 2 says which histogram represents the data, and you have a list of numbers right here. If I look at the 4 choices for the histograms, I see that the classes or the intervals down at the bottom are all broken up the same way. I have 0 to 9, 10 to 19, and so on. So I went ahead and I've got that chunked up right here, and we're going to go through and just figure up how many of our pieces of data fall within each category. Now, you got lucky because your list of numbers is already in order. So we're going to come through and I'm going to start it for you and let you finish it. My first category is 0 to 9. So I want to go figure out how many are between 0 and 9. And I see that it's 8 and 9 would fall in that category. So that's 2. I want my bar to have a height of 2 for that first piece. 10 to 19. Let me switch colors. I want everything that's between 10 and 19. So that would be all these things that I'm underlining in pink. And there are 5 of those values. So you want your bar to have a height of 5 for that second chunk right there. And you would just continue going in this pattern to figure out the correct histogram for your data. Versions 2 and 3, very, very similar. Your intervals are still broken up the same way. So you'll just go through, figure out how many are between 0 and 9, how many are between 10 and 19, and so on, and match the histogram that has the bar heights matching what you figured up. Question 3, which box and whisker plot represents the data set? And you have a list of numbers and you have 4 choices for your box and whisker plots. You have to choose the one that represents the data accurately. The way that we find our box and whisker plots is we start by getting our 5 number summary. That's where we find these 5 things. We need our minimum value, our maximum value, the median, and then the quartiles are the halfway points of each half. So the lower quartile is the midway point of your lower half, and your upper quartile is the midway point of your upper half of data. So you start by placing your numbers in order from least to greatest, and that's what I've done right here in red. And then you will need to go through, identify your minimum, your maximum, those are the 2 easy ones to find, and then you need to find your median. So the median is the halfway point. If I start on both ends, the left and the right, and kind of work my way towards the center, I will see that the median is 14. That's going to be where my data cuts in half, is at the value 14. That will be your median. I'm going to label it Q2. It's the second quartile. And then you see that you have a low half of data. Now you've got 4 values over here. So you want to split them in half. If I split them in half, I want 2 and 2 on either side of my line. This is my first quartile. Same thing on the upper half. I want to cut it in half, and that would be my third quartile. So you need to figure out what those values are. You need to figure out what this number is that falls exactly between 7 and 11 by finding the mean of 7 and 11. Figure out what number this is that's exactly between them. 14 is your second quartile or your median. And then your upper quartile is going to be whichever number falls exactly between 15 and 19. So you will take the average or the mean of 15 and 19. If you notice, our quartiles split our data into equal sections. I have 2 values, 2 values, 2 values, 2 values. That's what quartiles do to our data. Versions 2 and 3 of this question, same steps, different box and whisker plots that you'll be matching up to. Question 4 says, Ramon recorded how many miles he biked each day in this table. Your instructions are down here. Create a dot plot for the data in the table. Hover over each number on the number line, then click and drag up to create the dots. I obviously can't do that part on this PowerPoint slide because I'm not logged into the OHS to be able to drag these bars. But we can actually plot the dots on it and kind of show you a little bit of what it would look like for you taking this actual checkpoint. A dot plot tells us the frequencies of our values. So for right here, a distance of 1 mile, that happened 2 times. So I know that I'm going to use 2 dots for my value of 1 mile. Similarly, the distance of 2 miles has 2 dots because the frequency says 2, and you will just keep going in this pattern. The distance of 3 miles, it says has a frequency of 4, so you'll click and drag the 3 section to have a height of 4, and you will just continue in that same pattern, following what the table tells you to do. Very similar for versions 2 and 3, except your numbers are different. Question 5. Suppose 240 nursing students took a certification test that is worth 140 points. The 5-number summary for the scores is shown here. You get your minimum, your first quartile, your median, your third quartile, and then your maximum value. The question says about how many students had a score of 130 or less. So I know that this is the amount of numbers that I care about, the scores of 130 or less. That would be these right here. And that 130 is my third quartile mark. So let's remember what the quartiles tell us. Your upper quartile is right here, third quartile right here where I'm hovering. And so if I want to figure out the third quartile or less, that's going to be this 25% plus this 25% plus this 25% for a total of 75% of my data. So I'm going to go write that in right here, that this represents 75% of my data. In order to find a percent of something, I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to take that 75%. I want to find 75% of the number of students, which would be 240 students. It gave us that at the beginning. I'm going to set this up like multiplication, but I have to turn my percentage into a decimal so that my calculator can compute. 75% is equal to 0.75. So you will take 0.75, you will multiply that by your number of students to get the answer, and just choose the choice that most nearly matches what you get. The other two versions of the question are very, very similar. Again, just read what it's asking you for. Version 2 says a score of 130 or less. That would be this. And then version 3 says a score of 110 or less. That would be this little section right here. So you'll just need to go back to this information with the percentages and just remember that each quartile represents 25% of your data. So for this version 2 question, I'm looking for the third quartile and below. That means I cover 3 sections of 25% each for a total of 75%. And then this version 3, I want the first quartile and below. That's one section of 25% for a total of 25% of my, in this case, it's electricians.